Gary, welcome back, my friend.
I'm so happy to be back. It's nice to be a part of this conversation again.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like we said before the show, so much has changed, which is really a scary concept when you think about it. I mean, it's been a couple of years, but it's not like it's been 30 years. I mean, the technological innovation, a lot of these kind of socioeconomic forces outside of world war potential, not that we want to go down that rabbit hole, hopefully, climate change, the big one that I'd love to start this conversation off, was the rise of AI and chat gpt, and I read that article that you sent me, and it was actually a really optimistic viewpoint. I really loved that because a lot of people, especially in universities and colleges, are kind of scared of that. But you have a different perspective. What's your take on the rise of AI and ChatGPT and so forth?
I think it's unavoidable at this point, and if not already a part of the academic world, in ways I think that faculty and maybe administration have been slow to realize within the span of a year. Because
Yes.
it's happened so fast, but it's here and here to stay. So I don't want to, go into crisis mode so much, um, and think about all of the potential major implications. I mean, for me, I really wanted to refocus on the question of what is education,
Mm,
and what do we expect from people who go through the primary school, high school, and college.
mm,
Uh, and so I at least wanted to, through my own story, um, talk about ways in which you might learn to live with AI, and not lose what I find to be the deeper purposes of education, that have to do with the life of the mind. Um, more so than technical skills, or thinking about careers.
yeah. Yeah, I'd never drawn that distinction prior to reading your articles, specifically the article you sent me recently, because you do think about what a college and higher education and so forth is designed to do, and it is designed to get you to think and to question. I wonder why. That's why if I just look back about or on on all of the podcasts I've done um, with lecturers and teachers and so forth, there is a left leaning bias that I've noticed, and I kind of like that because I probably have a bit of a left leaning bias myself.
Yeah, I guess you can call it left. It's I don't know. I don't know. It's a weird. It's a commitment to the value of knowledge and knowledge acquisition, which comes in all kinds of forms. So it's not just like this exclusive liberal arts thing. It's like, how do we integrate along with computer science or economics?
Mm,
My job, the study of religion. So
yes.
trying to maintain some kind of emphasis on some existential questions, and sort of what I think are sort of deeper issues that also prepare you, for the
Mm,
future, for adulthood, and for whatever is ahead, as these students get out of uh, college. In my case, since I teach at a university.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think. I mean that probably lends itself to another thing that's happening at the moment. I'm not sure what the data suggests, but I feel like there's so much questioning going on in this day and age, which is obviously a wonderful thing. But something that I've noticed, in working with clients as a counselor, is that people are really concerned about the changing value of things. And I think one of the best things that the internet has done is that it's completely blown out the middleman with so many different things. And information is probably that big thing there. Do you have I'd really love to hear your take on this, Gary. Do you what in terms of the value of a university or a college degree in this day and age? Do you see that changing? Is it diminishing? Is it increasing? What's that been like for you as a lecturer and a professor?
Well, it's completely gone to hell.
Right.
Excuse me. That's a little over dramatic.
Yeah, sure, sure.
I sound like the old guys, when I was a young gun.
Yeah,
Uh, so maybe it's perennial or something with generations, but
sure.
there is a sense, again, that things have um, really changed dramatically. And just questions around what does a teacher do in the classroom with students isn't so simple. And all kinds of forces at work. And yeah, I don't want to kind of single out or blame anything in particular, but certainly to single out a couple things in
Yeah, sure.
particular. Uh, I think partly we have, a kind of administrative expansion.
Mm,
So that is middle management, in a lot of ways that only leads to additional kinds of paperwork. And certainly assessment is a very key catchword in education, at least my experience today.
mm.
That again may be helpful and good in some ways, but can get in the way in other ways of just, I don't know, being yourself, trying to get to know students, work with students, and not being so preoccupied, with how is this going to play out in terms of numbers and quantification and things.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that may be something to think about, and certainly the financial
Yeah.
disparities, but also I think collapse for many colleges and universities is symptomatic of deeper kinds of attitudes where
Mhm.
education isn't a top priority. It's actually pretty low in many states here, and that has all kinds of political implications for sure. But in any case, there's a lot going on in so many ways that kind of educational culture that that spanned my career is changing. Whether that's for good or bad, I guess we will see.
Yes.
Um, I'm kind of pessimistic about education.
Yeah. In what way?
Okay, I think based on what I was just saying, it's just
Mm.
not valued so much
Yeah.
in many societies, and that the value may be again focused on different kinds of knowledge acquisition, uh,
Mm.
while in the sciences, math, again, things that are important and critical for students. But hopefully, there isn't a kind of equal value for I don't think for literature and history, as I've said, religion, other
Yeah.
kinds of humanistic leaning studies. And that's part of the decline, I guess, for me, that feels threatening or concerning is the humanities decline in terms of numbers of students and majors, um, university resources. I will say, for sure that I am lucky being at Emory, where there is, some efforts at keeping a balance um, on what it's like, for a undergraduate to go through a curriculum, general education requirements, and acquire a degree. Um, but I think it's few and far between. So,
Mm.
those
Mm.
are a few things.
It's a funny one for me. I'll bring myself into this just for a bit of context as to why I reached out to you and why I really valued our conversation last time, and also why what you just said really kind of hits home for me is because so I work as a counselor. I'm still studying actually, and I'm going into to honors into psychology, psychological science, and then perhaps down the clinical pathway after that. The real love that I have is around understanding belief systems and ideas, and and you can see how religious ideas and psychedelics and reality itself come um under that picture, because to me they really represent religion, especially as well. And we can talk about the fact that it's such a broad definition after this, but that idea of belief systems really kind of acting as a first principles influence on how anyone sees the world, and that dramatic the dramatic implications that would have for a clinical industry, a counseling into like how someone sees the world, based upon how society that they're embedded in sees the world, and it's I find myself in a funky place right now, because as the world, especially my industry, becomes trying to make psychology a harder science. Let's look at the data here, and moving away from the soft science aspect, which is where I really find my heart. I'm in this place where I could do these courses, that are very holistic, and they're about spirituality, and they're about they bring in psychedelic assisted therapy ideas in there, and then I see, well, if I do this degree over here that I kind of find a little bit boring, well, that's where the job and the money is, So I kind of see myself, do I do that and then just in my downtime study this and get people like yourself, who I really love, on the show? And do you know what I mean? It's that hits home for me too, what you said.
Well, and I mean, it may be that you're embodying something that is happening within psychology today. It's been a trend more recently around, well, the um, I suppose, to put it in the terms you've been talking about, um, how to incorporate spirituality into therapy,
Mm,
making people whole or feel better, or do better. And and I think that, again, that struggle, at least is a struggle. I think, right? I mean, in some sense, there's a way in which the sciences have so taken over so much of how we think about health,
yeah, yeah,
but also mental, and that's because it's been very successful to have
sure,
that sort of perspective and worldview. But on the other hand, it's also left some things out, and we've seen where the gaps are. So the past, I think, few decades have seen this, I think, effort to slow down all the biological kind of more neuroscientific approaches to thinking about mental health for
sure.
for this conversation. And I don't know, what the answer is, because you do have to weigh all those considerations about yeah, in terms of your sense of your professional life or vocation. What really um, feels like the right path. Again, for your patients, but not just for your patients, but for
Sure,
yourself
sure.
as well. Um, so I think it's too bad that like programs like the one that you're in and others, most others, really don't have that capacity to um, think about how to mix up the curriculum, think about ways of training that cut across this, religion and the sciences, to put it in those terms.
Yes.
Although it's certainly much more complicated.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, you find it funny how people say, oh, can science and religion ever get along? As though they're asking, can cats and dogs ever get along?
Well, yeah, yeah. That's right. That's one way to look at those dynamics, I suppose. Um, and there's also ways in which they overlap in some interesting ways, where science can be considered religious. Um, and yeah, the study of religion can aspire to be scientific. So it's kind of interesting in ways that work against that strict dichotomy.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a funny place we're in right now because I feel that, um, we've pushed so hard on the scientific front, which is I try to look back on history, with a dose of optimism and try to recognize, you know, the significance as to why things kind of morphed into the way they did, and we had such a subjective viewpoint, you know, and then starting to take our own ego out of the picture, and you see what happens with the scientific method, Francis Bacon, and so forth, and you go, okay, well, what is actually going on outside of this? Can we just be an impartial observer here? You know, and then we get to where we are right now. I wonder sometimes. I really love your perspective on this. Whether you feel like we've almost thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and we need to find a balance between understanding the objective world, but also the significance of our own internal experience and how we find meaning in our lives.
Hmm. Right. Again, a real long-standing struggle, I think,
Yes.
even and in the post-Enlightenment world that we are still somewhat working inside of. Um, and yeah, that's the challenge because you can't deny science and its ability to change societies and individual bodies for the good, um, as well as part of that longer history is also uh, horrible treatment of individuals and much more kinds of malignant attitudes that
Mm.
are also built into the rise of science and the Enlightenment and so on. Um, but as you were saying, I mean, part of the success, at least in the West, was this, sort of cutting off of the interior life and thinking more about how to study the natural world objectively in some
Sure, sure.
and that's we've seen in the 18th into the 19th and into the 20th century where that has led,
Yeah.
both incredible advances and transformations in public health and in medicine, and also the Holocaust, and
Right,
other
right.
expressions of, again, of more uh, horrific actions with, in terms of science. Um,
Yeah.
so it's, I don't know if I have the answers, but I think in the space, for example, that you mentioned of psychedelics,
Mm.
that in that little corner of the larger universe, you see the ways in which science and religion are so um, integral.
Yes, yes.
What is happening uh, um, in terms of psychology, in terms of therapy, or therapeutic potential.
Mm.
Uh, but I don't think they're still working out how a more humanities or religious vision and intervention uh, can play a role in the larger clinical context. Um, there seems to be over here a growing uh, market for psychedelic assisted therapy and having trained guides.
Mm.
And so there you can see um, people who are um, both inside and outside of traditional religions
Right.
getting involved. And so that, this is all happening right now in real time. And I think there's a sense in which it's the wild, wild west. But
True.
there's also the sense in which, we're going to see how science and religion kind of deal with, uh, and work together to think about what impact psychedelics can have for people suffering from PTSD or death
Mm.
anxiety, whatever may be ailing.
Yeah, well, I suppose we'll do our best to be there for the scientists that might be listening to this. We'll get our definitions right. We'll make sure that we adhere to the scientific method in that way. What in terms of religion as a definition, it's such a broad term, and I know this is something I was reading from you recently as well. Do you have a definition for religion, or is it something that changes depending on the context?
The latter.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so scientists won't be happy.
Sure, sure.
I, I refuse, and others besides me
Yeah.
will think that it's possible, to really come up with some kind of objective definition that's universal and that everyone can agree to.
Sure, sure.
And I think that's both writ large in society, but I also see it in my classroom where I
Mm,
kind of go through this exercise as, probably in every class for the last 30 years or so of my teaching, where, a very important part the early stages of a semester, I'll try to get them to talk about their definitions of religion.
mm.
And, and that is in a kind of microcosm, ways in which there are as many definitions to religion as there are students who are in, chairs in the classroom.
Yeah.
Although there might be places of overlap, but still,
Mm.
it's one of those concepts that's uh, slippery and evades any kind of real rooted definition. And then also, of course, there's all the linguistic stuff around, well, where does a word originate? What's its etymology?
Mm.
Um, do other languages have the word religion, for example?
Yeah.
Of course, they don't. So it's a very Western
Interesting.
concept, category, and has its utility for sure, but also I think has its limitations and baggage that is a whole other podcast, I suppose, or
Yeah, definitely.
reading history that some in your audience no doubt knows.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that is a really interesting idea. This postmodern force that's come into the West now, which is I always try to understand. I try to do my best as best I can, to see both sides of it. And we not necessarily in a political context, but from a clinical standpoint, one of the things that we're really noticing is that, in the 20th century with the rise of the DSM and so forth, it was very kind of, modern, objective truth, absolute definitions and so forth. And we have these categories for mental health issues. We have schizophrenia. And if you exceed this threshold of checklists and so forth, then you have schizophrenia, or bipolar or anxiety, whatever it is. Now with the postmodern era, we're noticing that definitions are becoming fuzzier,
Hmm.
and I think we need that as well because truth of life is in the gray, right? But where I notice that people are struggling is how much fuzz, and how much category, and I suppose that kind of leads us back to this idea of what is religion? How much fuzz can we take in, and how broad can the definition be? So long as we're still talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's sort of anything goes mentality around religion.
Sure.
There are ways in which there are some boundaries or restrictions or markers that signal uh, more religious or spiritual sorts of activities and ways of thinking.
Mm,
And so that's where I like to hang my hat, is thinking about what are the markers um, that we can find across different cultures that seem to point to a certain kind of outlook or perspective that um, that works with the label religious. So, not to get all into this, but I try to stay away from the word religion
sure.
as a noun. I mean, but people are religious. We're all religious in all kinds of ways.
Mm, mm,
I think it's part of the human condition to be religious.
yeah,
Uh, there are signs of religious life that have to do with identity, that have to do with transcendence, that have to do with community, that have to do with myth, that have to do with meaning making, that have to
mm,
do with ritual. That you know doesn't always line up, whether we're talking about medieval Catholic Europe or um, prehistoric uh, Americas and so on. It's very much a moving target, which makes my job so much fun.
yeah,
And I want to both confuse people as much as possible. The fuzziness, I love how you put that, the messiness of reality,
yes,
is that, um, the artificiality of taxonomies and categories that help to bring order to the chaos,
sure,
but
sure.
also, as talking about, like with psychology, also um, shifts through time and so on. But so I think the same as with our religious lives, and that allows me, at least, and again others, not just me, but to open up the possibilities of again how we might think about religious, or how we are religious in ways that we might not recognize.
Definitely, definitely. Well, let's elaborate a bit on that, Gary. So as we move towards a more secular understanding of the world, perhaps even its value and so forth, where is the place for religion in this day and age? How do you see religious life as a value to someone who's growing up in the 21st century?
I see it in drugs, quite frankly. Um, Again, to be pushing it a little bit, but I am writing this book at the moment on religion and drugs, and I
Oh,
think,
cool.
in addition to the incredible depth of our interest in altering our consciousness,
Yes.
and often, for sure, for religious reasons, as well as there might be other reasons. Um, so, along with that deep, deep history, is, I think, the future of religion in America, or maybe even globally. Um, and so that is where people find the sacred and sources for religious life.
Mm.
Um, and answers to questions that traditionally we've associated with religion, traditional religions, and so on. So, I'm interested, in all kinds of things, but that would be one example of thinking about music, popular cultures, and so on, celebrity. Um, our religious lives are tied up in sort of sacred sources of meaning and perspective
Yeah.
and orientation that are no longer restricted or situated in a church or a temple, or in the Bible or whatever.
Yeah, I think that is an area, and full disclosure, that's actually why I went back to uni to become a psychedelic assisted therapist. I'm so interested in it. Personal reasons as well. I in my I was about 18 or 19, I went to schoolies, which is over here. It's kind of like you finish year 12, you finish senior year in high school, and you're a free, you're a free kid, and you think you're an adult at that time, don't you? 18, 19, like top of the world. And I played around with mushrooms and psychedelics before, so I thought I was pretty well versed in it. I came up. We had my partner actually moved up to Queensland from Melbourne, which is like it's a bit of a warmer climate up here, and I'd come up here just to the border in Byron Bay, just about an hour south, and for my schoolies week. And a friend and I, who I'd grown up with, we had a very significant amount of psilocybin, and we thought we'd just go out and have a bit of a party and have a bit of fun. And it was by far the most amount of psilocybin I'd ever had, and it was a transcendently harrowing experience, to put it lightly.
I like how you put that.
Yeah,
Yeah, all just mystical union and joy and euphoria.
that's right. That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah,
I've heard
unbelievable. It
many
was
stories. Then,
many
but
stories.
please, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. But the thing that was so interesting about it was I look back on that now, and if I'd had the right set and setting, and I've spoken about it so many times on the podcast before, but I was around a whole bunch of drunk dudes who I didn't know. They were like my mates' friends. One of the guys was like flicking the light switch off and on and doing this in my face and telling me like what I was seeing and everything. And it was just I was so vulnerable. It was not a good experience at all. But I think if I had been in the right set and setting, some of the downloads that I might have received, and the ideas of the self and everything like that, it took me so many years to try to integrate, to find an identity again, because my concept of myself and reality had crumbled to so many layers. I needed a religious map, from a secular point of view. And I think that's why I've been so interested in speaking with people like yourself. A lot of the psychedelic research for so long is, in many ways, I'm still trying to put the pieces back together. I think now I always will, but I really see a lot of value in the stuff that you're interested in, the stuff you teach, your writings and your books, because the material life doesn't give us everything, and I think for people who are trying to understand a deeper um, view of themselves, it actually almost gives them nothing to be so bold.
Right. Well, I was thinking about what the phrase you just used, which
Mm,
is getting the kind of religious map for the secular view or something.
mm, mm.
And I was going to ask what you meant by that when you were thinking, and how you think of those terms, religious and secular. Um,
Yeah,
not to put you on the spot, but because I think of that often, and secular and secularization is certainly, a key reference point for thinking about, contemporary culture or whatever, however you want to mark it historically. Um,
yeah,
and I like to sort of go against that and think, well, even with the more secular context we're in, that the religious doesn't disappear,
true.
uh, can very much shifts or becomes attached to other kinds of aspects of our experience and our communities and our identity formation. Um, yeah, so that's
Yeah,
I don't know. What do you think of that? But it's
it's a good point. It's actually a really good point. I think, just to reflect there, I think when I use the word secular, I think what I'm describing there is probably a non kind of Anglo-Christianized, institutionalized religious idea, you know. Um, whether or not that's the actual definition of secular, I'm not too sure. But I think, I remember reading a lot of I got heavily into Ram Dass, previously known as Richard Alpert. And his work was really interesting. When he was talking about the psilocybin, experiences that he was having with Timothy Leary, and then he was trying to understand what was going on. And he says that when he went over to India and he started, getting more into Hinduism and and these ideas of the East, that I suppose that's where I got that phrase from. He said that, they had a map there that they'd been teaching for thousands of years that really described a lot of this stuff in which psychedelics weren't even necessary, and I think that if I had had something like that, and again, you know, completely my fault. I was the one eating the mushrooms. But even still, if I was, even just something as simple as, hey, if you see a door, don't hesitate, go into it. Have that compassionate curiosity. Something like that might have helped a little bit. So,
Sure, that's wonderful. I think that's really a great point in thinking about, especially um, the psychedelic renaissance, and how people are um, trying to balance again the more clinical with something with the maps,
yes,
and how do people who are trained as guides uh, work within that realm. Um, and that's only one more public and surface level of the ways in which psychedelics are so much a part of contemporary society. I'm sure it's the same there, but here there are all kinds of more underground psychedelic communities with
definitely.
shamans or self-proclaimed shamans or real shamans or however you want to talk about shamanism,
Yeah.
that also um, is not so not clinically controlled or regulated,
Yes.
but that is um, I think working with all kinds of different maps, religious kind of sacred maps, for people who aren't necessarily um, in need of psychological therapy, for some
Definitely.
ailment, but who just want to go there, want to trip, and want to experience for themselves what you know what the drugs have to offer. Um, and that I think that's part of the Wild West nature of the moment that we're in. But
Mm,
the question of the maps and how they get aligned and where they originate is will be again from a more humanistic point of view, someone who studies comparative religion or thinking about culture and religion. This will be interesting. There's a way in which a map, if I may go on here, uh,
please.
the way in which a religious mapping is already taking place within the clinical setting.
Mm,
People are trying to figure out, um, what um, what's the best way to guide someone through some kind of trip, and um, what's the proper ritual setting, proper music, and what kind of mythology is operating within this clinical worldview and orientation, where expectations going in,
mm.
faith is already operating. Anyway, I like to um, uh, think about those various textures that might uh, be associated with what some would assume to be a very secular setting.
Well, that's a very good point. It is a very good point, and how does this this idea of religion, you know, weave its way into areas in which, people do view it as a dichotomy and really is it a dichotomy or are actually both working? Is it water and oil, or is it
Yeah,
actually like salt in water where they're both actually becoming one?
yeah. I mean, sure. I think that's important to think. Yeah, and both and instead of either or.
Right, right. Yeah, definitely, definitely. So tell me about this book, Gary. Have you got a working title for it at the moment? Or?
Well, it's just I'm calling it Sacred Drugs, and it's basically coming out of the class that I've been teaching.
Oh, great.
now for a few years. So it's sort of working not just with psychedelics, as I've said before and other times, um, but thinking about psychoactive drugs across the spectrum. You know, coffee, I see you're already on it. Um,
Very much so. Some would say I'm addicted, actually.
well, uh, maybe we'll come back to addiction
Yes, yes,
and the sacred. But I mean, coffee for sure, or alcohol, tobacco, um, chocolate,
yes.
uh, prescription pills. Even I'm thinking about pharmaceutical industry. So there's just, I think, a way in which many of these substances um, help to fuel our religious life, again in ways that aren't so coherent or tied to a particular like tradition, but that
Mm,
kind of operate in the same way. Whether we're talking about the ritual of coffee drinking in the morning as not a transcendent experience that brings you to some kind of mystical heights in union with the divine, but as an ordering, stabilizing force that
mm.
has a great deal of power, that goes beyond the ritual, but is certainly tied into the substance
Yeah,
of what coffee provides. Um, or yeah, I mean, we talk about antidepressants and other
yeah.
ways in which so much of our religious lives are tied to drugs. And again, that's not surprising. Historically, deep into the evolutionary past, it is absolutely commonplace.
Yes.
Or not uncommon. I mean, certainly Africa, Asia, different continents, had different substances, and again, in terms of prehistory, um, uh, obviously different variations, but a very common feature in terms of the archaeological records and more. So that's interesting. That's fascinating.
It's really fascinating. It's, even as you're talking there, I think about as a child, like if we just extract the most fundamental concept of what a drug is, it's just something outside of the self that alters one's consciousness. As you're speaking there, I'm thinking about me being a child playing on a playground, and you can stand on those spinny things. And I'm like 6 or 7 years old, and I'm thinking now as an adult, why is there this thing in me that makes me want to get dizzy, get out of my own head?
Well, I don't, here we go. One of the other areas I try to cover in thinking about these questions, of course, is not just the sort of human evolutionary past, but also animals.
Right. All right.
And, clear evidence that animals in the wild, will find substances that are intoxicating and
Mm,
continue to go back to them, whether you're
interesting.
talking about fermented fruits and elephants or birds. They're, across the animal kingdom, and scientists have written about this. This is a common feature,
Mm.
and um, it's led one scientist, a psychopharmacologist, who wrote a book called Intoxication, where he argues that this is a part of a larger argument for talking about a universal drive to alter consciousness. It's built
Mm.
in our species, like the drive for sex
Yeah.
or food. It's like that basic,
Oh, right, right.
And again, this is not the fringe. It's very much like all kinds of books that have been written about that. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. And on your point directly, it's funny. There was recently, and I nabbed it because I was going to use it in my class. Was an article that was based on a recent scientific study that looked at, I think it was great apes, who would show this behavior of spinning,
Oh, really?
just having a very keen interest in spinning on their own, in terms of solitary activity.
Right.
ways that would completely get them dizzy and alter consciousness. And again, this has repercussions in terms of thinking about, because he also talked about children, and the ways in which this is a fairly pretty universal
Interesting.
um, phenomenon, where kids will somehow instinctually kind of find ways to spin, or be drawn to it. And so there are numerous ways in which we can alter our consciousness, for sure. So that's has all kinds of interesting dimensions. But yeah, but for me, I'm just thinking about the drug component,
Sure, sure,
and
sure.
the kind of, as an agent, as you were saying, as a drug, as an external agent that alters consciousness and moods and perceptions, and can have all kinds of physiological and emotional and mental and spiritual effects.
Definitely, yeah, yeah, yeah. No, the that idea, this evolutionary force, and for it to be so low in it's so basic in the brain, is a really interesting idea as well. And I think, just hearing you speak there, to me, it would make sense that we would have some sort of adaptation to not only seek comfort and familiarity, but to also seek nuance and spontaneity, almost like shaking the snow globe.
I mean, total, yeah, totally. And again, the sort of evidence is bearing that out.
Mm,
In terms of the potential for evolutionary impact, for spinning the globe or rewiring the brain in various ways, and all kinds of neurological impacts that psychoactive substances have made a huge impact on our development, and as well as social and cultural developments.
yeah.
So again, how do we live with this urge? How do we deal with the sense of wanting to get out of our heads and feel something different than the ordinary, um, or find ways again to help? Yeah, just with the existential stuff of
Yes.
life. Uh, as long as you can predict. For me, clearly in terms of death, you can see all kinds of ways in which drugs and religion and death are interlaced, um, in our deep history, but also today in some ways. Um,
Yeah.
but through different life passages, I mean, again, the record shows that the psychoactive drugs, alcohol, whatever, coca leaves, wherever you're looking, um, could play a very important role, again, around the question of how to make sense of our bodies.
Yeah.
It's kind of basic religious um, uh, responsibility. That's part of what religions can do, is help us make sense of our bodies.
Yeah.
Uh, but uh, but also, yeah, I mean, other aspects that are universal in what it means to be alive and human, suffering, aging, and so on, as well as feelings of pleasure,
Right.
and euphoria or ecstasy. All of these different aspects of human experience get tied in. I mean, not always, and in every culture and society, but in a number of different settings and cultural contexts that are, undeniably um, suggest that psychoactive drugs have been an essential part of what it means to be human.
Mm, mm.
That's
It's
a big statement. I have no idea if that's true, but yeah, that's where I was going.
yeah,
But anyway, you think about it, it is pretty amazing.
it's absolutely astounding. Absolutely astounding. And even with MDMA, what MDMA does for the ecstatic. I think I learned that from you last time. Ecstasis. We were talking, I think we were talking at around the time when Brian Murarescu's book, The Immortality Key, came out. So I had you on the podcast whilst I was reading that, and my mind was exploding, but that's been an important book, in relation to Thanatos and dying, that idea of if you die before you die, you won't die when you die.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, profound and certainly tied into that more ancient Greek cultural setting, certainly, but also a sentiment that, yeah, I mean, I think is you can find in different religious cultures as well. Sort of ways in which, yeah, you can transcend consciousness, kind of enter into other realms
Mm,
where, in a sense, there's a death and a whatever rebirth encounter with some new knowledge and so on.
mm,
Uh, but his book was obviously really important for sort of the public awareness, um, especially of the possibility, that these different psychoactive substances or psychedelics may have played a role in sort of the early church and early kind of Eucharistic rituals and so on.
mm.
I like that aspect of the book. Kind of turn things around, but as part of the zeitgeist we're in, where you're younger than me, but just sort of living through the war on drugs and how we
Yeah.
were brainwashed. So many about. Do you have the war on drugs? I mean, was that
Oh, yeah, massively.
say no for us? But and I get students in my class who were clearly like have no way, had no way of ever thinking about drugs as potentially religious,
Yeah, yeah.
positive. And, drugs, that didn't mean prescription pills. Drugs doesn't mean
Right,
alcohol.
exactly.
You know how this goes. So it's, yeah, I think really worth, at least I'm not a proselytizer, I'm not going out and trying to be a guru or some new drug leader.
Yeah.
Not at all. I love education, so I think this effort to rethink drugs in our lives, is right on, and we're in a moment where people are interested, and and as we know, everyone's on drugs.
Exactly, exactly. That's the big thing. That really is the big thing there, that point there. And, I think, a friend of mine, Johan Hari, he's written extensively about this, and his book, I think it is his first big book, but he'd written a book before that. It's called Chasing the Scream, where he actually went back and looked at the history of the war on drugs, and it just the racist undertones that were involved in that, with a man named Harry Anslinger, and how weed was so heavily tied to the African American community, and how this guy's inherent racism drove this thing, so a really dark past.
Yeah, no, I mean, very much so, and still uh, intertwined with the sacred. Even as in terms of that racism coming out of a very Protestant white sort of sensibility,
Mm, mm.
and morality. So again, even there, as we think about religion, doesn't have anything to do with the war on drugs. It's there are ways in which you can tease out how religious impulses and sensibilities were very much a part of um, all of the legal political crowd.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Well, Gary, look, I want to be respectful of your time, my friend, and I always feel like the hour goes far too quickly, which is it's good and bad. It's bad because it means I've still got a bit of coffee here, so we could keep going whilst I'm on drugs. But good, it means you'll have to do a round three. So
And I was thinking the same thing. I mean, I feel the same way. It's kind of hard to stop, but I know there's more. So um, we can make arrangements again and do this again. Great.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Let's hope that we're not in a Chat GPT 48 world by then, and we're speaking through a hologram or something.
Well, it'll be you and me face to face, or as face to face as this Zoom can be. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Gary, thank you so much, mate. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. And yeah, for anyone that would like to know more about you and would want to stay up to date with, for example, when this book comes out and so forth, where's the best place to find you?
Uh, I'm easy to find, so the website is just GaryLaderman.com, and some of the usual places. At least for now, I'm on Twitter. But yeah, Instagram for sure. And I try to keep up and keep kind of public on these developments. So very easy to find.
Beautiful, beautiful. Gary, thank you so much, guys. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'll speak to you next week. Bye bye.